on BBC iPlayer.
As the Conservative leadership race enters its next stage, the two remaining candidates vying for number 10
will take part in a head-to-head debate in front of a live studio audience.
Find out where they stand on the big issues that affect you.
Our next Prime Minister, Monday night at 9 on BBC One and iPlayer.
The BBC News now on One with Reeta Chakrabarti.
Tonight, the focus is the economy and taxation as the two Conservative leadership contenders begin their 6-week campaign. Rishi Sunak defended his plans to delay tax cuts until inflation is under control. Liz Truss wants to break from his policies and that of chancellors before him.
For the past 2 decades, there's been a consensus on our economic policy, and it hasn't delivered economic growth.
If the government goes on a huge borrowing spree, that is only going to make the situation worse.
We'll be taking a closer look at what each contender is promising. Also on the programme, Turkey says there's been a deal to allow Ukraine to resume exports of grain through the Black Sea after Russia's invasion sent grain prices soaring and stoked a global food crisis. The BBC offers an apology and a big payout to Prince William and Harry's former nanny over false claims made about her private life. Rare, detailed interviews to the BBC from former soldiers in the Myanmar army. They tell of rape, murder and the burning of villages. And the telescope that can see dead stars collide, a process that produced heavy metals that formed planets like our own billions of years ago.
And coming up on the BBC News channel, Jonas Vingegaard extends his lead in the Tour de France and shows sportsmanship to go with his cycling skill.
Good evening. The two Conservative leadership candidates have been setting out their stall in more detail, with the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss suggesting her party's economic policy has been wrong for its entire period in power. Ms Truss, who has previously been a Treasury Minister, said the stance of governments for the past 2 decades hadn't delivered growth and that she will cut taxes if she wins the contest to replace Boris Johnson. It's in stark contrast to her opponent, the former Chancellor Rishi Sunak, whose policies she is criticising. He restated his plan to cut personal taxes only when inflation is under control. He said it was important to be honest about the challenges the country faces and that if the party were led by Liz Truss, it would lose to Labour. Here's our political editor, Chris Mason.
You can tell us whether you like pancakes or not.
Meeting the electorate of tomorrow. Liz Truss was in Peterborough this afternoon. The Foreign Secretary's gaze beyond this conversation has been on her opponent Rishi Sunak for putting up taxes when he was Chancellor. But now she's extending her critique.
The fact is we've had economic policy, not just under this government, for the past 2 decades. There's been a consensus on our economic policy and it hasn't delivered economic growth. What I know about the Treasury from having worked there, they do resist change. And what people in Britain desperately need now is change.
And yes, Liz Truss was the Chief Secretary to the Treasury for 2 years. Here she is on Budget Day 5 years ago, and here she is a year later, full of enthusiasm about the then Chancellor Philip Hammond's speech. Her opponent Rishi Sunak was the Chancellor himself until a fortnight ago.
What gives you the edge over Liz Truss?
Her instincts are to cut taxes immediately. His are not. Speaking tonight, he emphasised dealing with spiralling prices and defended putting up tax on business.
I think what I'm doing is common sense Thatcherism. I think people know that she gripped inflation first.
But she also cut corporation tax.
Even though the corporation tax will go up, I think that's really perfectly reasonable because everyone knows we've spent a fortune during COVID to help get the country through it. Businesses got a lot of support.
And when asked, he reckons his rival's a loser.
If the Conservative Party chooses Liz Truss as its leader, it is likely to go down to defeat in the next election.
So that's what all the evidence that we have today would show, and that's what our members will need to consider.
What we have here are two competing visions about what it actually means to be a Conservative. For Liz Truss, the focus is on cutting taxes, getting rid of regulations and trying to boost the economy. For Rishi Sunak, the focus is on balancing the books and not cranking up the national debt. When you look at polls and surveys of Conservative Party members at the moment, Liz Truss's approach appears to be more popular. But this race is only just beginning. Both candidates want to talk about why they're different from this government and previous ones. But Liz Truss has been around here at a senior level for years.
I have been here before.
Here she is on her first day as a cabinet minister in 2014. It was nearly a year later before Rishi Sunak even became an MP. By 2020, he was Chancellor, and it's his record in that job, his response to COVID, his outlook on tax, that's serving up the first big skirmish of this contest. Chris Mason, BBC News at Westminster.
Well, there is clear blue water between the two candidates' early offers on the economy. But Liz Truss's plans to cut taxes in order to stimulate growth have come under particular scrutiny from the independent think tank, the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Our economics editor Faisal Islam has also been taking a closer look.
Here are the steps in between the Foreign Office and the Treasury. The two departments, in Mr Sunak's case until very recently, where the MPs vying to be our next Prime Minister ran great offices of state. It's been a very busy time with war in Europe and a related inflation crisis. But the debate over who gets to number 10 looks like being driven by economics. The backdrop is important here. Inflation is at a 40-year high and heading higher. There's risk of recession and worries of growth slowing as the economy stutters. And at the same time as all this, the tax burden is at its highest as a share of the economy in 70 years. So between the two candidates, a big choice has opened up. Liz Truss wants to make huge tax cuts, some from day one. Firstly, reversing the only recently enacted national insurance rise that would cost the Exchequer £13 billion a year. Then there's not going through with the planned significant rise in corporation tax from next April. That's another £17 billion a year. And on top of that, there's significant changes to energy bills that are not precise, but could cost a few billion or several billion. So let's call that 34 billion in total. Now, the government's current room for manoeuvre on its spending plans is about £30 billion if it's to hit its borrowing targets. But the government's budgetary watchdog, the OBR, say that that £30 billion may not even exist. So that would mean more borrowing, and it would take up all of the budgetary room for manoeuvre.
To the extent that tax cuts have an effect on inflation, it would be to increase inflation beyond what it would otherwise be. Both the Bank of England and the Office for Budget Responsibility think that we're at about capacity in the economy, which would imply that putting more money in people's pockets will drive up prices.
So it is a balancing act, and for households it could mean immediate lower taxes with Ms Truss, or at a later moment with Mr Sunak. Some further help with energy bills too, but the risk of stubborn inflation is that interest rates from the Bank of England go yet higher. We're yet to hear all the detail, but the number 10 race could see a material change in economic policy. Faisal Islam, BBC News.
Let's speak now to our political editor, Chris Mason, who's in Westminster. Chris, they've got to win over the Tory membership to win, but ultimately they've got to appeal to the country.
That's right, Reeta. They have an electorate in the long term and an electorate in the short term. And the focus now is on the short term and in particular on economics. And we've seen it today from both of the candidates. You heard Rishi Sunak there talking about his Thatcherite instinct. He's been saying that all day on the radio and in the newspapers. But the big moment today came from Liz Truss. There's economic analysis going back a couple of decades. And what effectively she's saying is that during the new Labour years and then the coalition years, there was a kind of claggy consensus that meant that the Tory tiger on economic policy couldn't be unleashed, and that she would do that. She would cut taxes, she would get rid of regulations, she would try and fire up the economy. Now, what we'll hear in return from Rishi Sunak in the coming days is, OK, but how do you pay for that? If you start cutting taxes, for instance, how do you commit to and keep those promises on reforming for and paying for social care. So a real division there between the two of them on economic policy, and in the coming weeks loads more scrutiny and jeopardy as the whole range of policies of a Prime Minister and a government are scrutinised for both of them.
Chris, many thanks. Chris Mason there reporting from Westminster. And the BBC will host a live debate with the two candidates. Our next Prime Minister, presented by Sophie Rayworth, and it'll be broadcast on Monday on BBC One at 9 p.m. Now to the war in Ukraine, and tonight Turkey says a deal has been reached which will allow Ukraine to resume exports of grain through the Black Sea. The two countries are to sign an agreement in Istanbul tomorrow with Russia and the Secretary-General of the UN. Before the war, from its ports on the Black Sea, Ukraine was able to export 4.5 million tonnes of agricultural produce a month. It's managed to get some exports out through other channels, but the closure of the Black Sea because of the conflict means that exports are down to about 30% of their pre-war totals, meaning shortages of food across some parts of the world. Well, our international correspondent Orla Guerin is in Istanbul for us tonight. And Orla, what do we know about the shape of this agreement?
Well, the full details won't be published until tomorrow, but we know the broad outlines of this deal, and it relies on a sort of a ceasefire at sea. Russia will have to undertake not to carry out attacks on Ukrainian ports while shipments are in transit. Ukraine will provide vessels that will escort cargo ships through waters that are currently mined. And all of this will be monitored by Turkey. There will be a coordination centre set up here in Istanbul, and Turkey will be involved in inspecting these vessels as they pass through what should be a safe maritime corridor through the Black Sea. Now, it all sounds very ambitious. It is. There are a lot of moving parts to this deal, and frankly, a lot of things that could go wrong, but there is also a huge amount at stake. As we speak tonight, there are about 20 million tonnes of Ukrainian grain trapped in silos in the port of Odessa. Now, that is grain that is urgently needed around the world. The UN's World Food Programme, for example, has said that failing to open Ukraine's ports would result in famine. And the EU has gone further and said that by blockading those ports, Russia is committing a war crime. Now, there will be a quid pro quo for Russia in this, some kind of bonus. We don't know exactly what. I think probably it will revolve around helping Russia to export its own grain and fertilizer. They are not under sanctions, but Russia has been having difficulty carrying out exports since it launched the invasion of Ukraine. But I think we have to be very careful about this deal. It is one deal about an urgently needed commodity. It's about grain, and it is a diplomatic breakthrough in a brutal war now in its 6th month. But I think any kind of broader peace talks are probably a very long way off. Let's not forget that Russia has said very recently it intends to step up its offensive in Ukraine. So this deal is a very specific deal and has to be considered against that backdrop. But it will be welcomed, certainly by the UN and by many countries around the world who will be hoping that that grain will soon be on ships and moving to where it needs to be.
Thank you very much. Orla Guerin reporting there. The BBC is to pay substantial damages to the former nanny of Prince William and Prince Harry over false claims about her used to obtain a panorama interview with Princess Diana in 1995. Alexandra Pettifer, who used to be known as Tiggy Leg Burke, appeared at the High Court to hear a public apology from the corporation over the fabricated allegation that she'd had an affair with Prince Charles, which resulted in an abortion. Here's our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell.
At the time of its transmission, it caused a sensation. Now, 27 years later, the panorama interview with Diana, Princess of Wales, is a matter of disgrace to the BBC over the deceitful tactics deployed by its reporter Martin Bashir to obtain the interview. One of those deceits was to make what the High Court heard was a false and malicious allegation against the woman on the left here, Tiggy Leg Burke, who at the time was working as the Prince of Wales's personal assistant. The BBC has agreed to pay substantial damages to Miss Leg Burke, or Mrs Alexandra Pettifer as she is now, and the BBC's Director General Tim Davie has apologised to her, to the Prince of Wales and the Dukes of Cambridge and Sussex. In a statement, Mr Davie said, It is a matter of great regret that the BBC did not get to the facts in the immediate aftermath of the programme, when there were warning signs that the interview might have been obtained improperly. Instead, as the Duke of Cambridge himself put it, the BBC failed to ask the tough questions. Had we done our job properly, Princess Diana would have known the truth during her lifetime. We let her, the royal family, and our audiences down. Mr Davies said the Panorama programme would never again be shown by the BBC. He hoped other broadcasters would exercise similar restraint. The BBC will be hoping, after the investigation by the former judge, Lord Dyson, and the compilation of his detailed report last year, and now today's court settlement, that it will finally be possible to draw a line under what, by any account, must surely be regarded as a shocking example of unscrupulous behaviour.
It is my view that the deceitful way the interview was obtained substantially influenced what my mother said.
Those were Prince William's words after Lord Dyson's findings were published. It was clear that the hurt and the anger were deep. Those feelings of a son whose mother was so deceived may have diminished a little by now, but they will surely not have disappeared. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
The US President Joe Biden has tested positive for COVID. The White House said he was experiencing very mild symptoms last night and tested positive this morning. The 79-year-old president is fully vaccinated and boosted, and he's also taking antiviral drugs. He will continue to work while in isolation. In a tweet, Mr. Biden said he was doing great and keeping busy. Here, an inquiry looking into how the UK has handled the COVID-19 pandemic was launched today. Baroness Hallett, the former High Court judge who's leading the inquiry, says it's time for facts, not opinions, and she promised to be resolute in her quest for the truth. So far, nearly 178,000 people in the UK have died with coronavirus. The hearings will begin in September and the first witnesses will be called next spring. Our health editor Hugh Pym has been speaking to some of those who lost loved ones.
John died with COVID in April 2020. He was 80. His daughter Sue says she hasn't been able to grieve. There are still too many unanswered questions. Charles says his life has been ruined by COVID. He lost his mother, then 6 weeks later his wife Katie. She was a care home manager and only 51 years old. Lawrence was 79 when he died with the virus. His daughter Lauren says an earlier lockdown could have saved him.
The pandemic is still with us, and there are many who are still suffering.
They listened to the chair of the COVID inquiry, Baroness Hallett, setting out her plans today, promising to be fair and robust. She said she recognised the devastating nature of bereavement.
For my part, I will do my very best to undertake the inquiry in a way that acknowledges this suffering and seeks to reduce the scope for others to suffer in the same way in the future.
Did you feel reassured by what she said?
What she said sounds good. It's early days. I am hopeful.
They announced the inquiry was supposed to happen in the spring, and then it's now July. So we kind of just we're reliving the experiences all over again, and we just want it done as quickly as possible, have the answers laid out in front of us, and finally move on with our lives, because it just feels like a 2-year hell where we haven't really got any answers for what's happened to our families and our loved ones.
I think bereaved families need to be at the heart of this. It needs to take in our views. And yes, it's going to be a long process, but I think she's going to be thorough. She's going to leave no stone unturned, which is what we really need.
Baroness Hallett said she was determined to conclude the inquiry work as quickly as possible. Families say they want answers, not apologies.
I don't want an apology from the government. I want them to learn lessons. If they were truly sorry, they'd have been honest in the early days of the pandemic. We don't accept his
lessons to be
apology.
learned, so no one has to go through what we've been going through for the last 2 years. It won't bring our loved ones back, we know that, but we don't want it to happen to anyone else.
We just want our loved ones to finally rest in peace.
I'd like to see them recognise the mistakes that were made and correct them with future pandemic responses, so we don't do the same things that we've done this time around, so we don't get it so badly wrong.
And that was Charles Persinger ending that report from our health editor, Hugh Pym. Now, in Spain, firefighters are still battling to contain dozens of wildfires like these, as most of the country went back on alert because of the high temperatures affecting much of Western Europe. A blaze near the northeastern town of Ateca has caused the evacuation of 1,700 people. Our Europe correspondent Nick Beak is there, and he sent this report.
The nightmare confronting the people of Ateca. Flames lighting up and ripping through the bone-dry hillside. The danger drawing ever closer. Hundreds forced to flee the now luminous landscape. Under today's searing sun, we found fire teams battling to contain new outbreaks.
Well, this is a perfect illustration of the challenge they face. This smouldering pocket has just sprung up out of nowhere, and it's now a race to contain it. But the ground is so dry, and every now and then the wind is picking up.
Scorched earth lined our route through this community. The irony here, the fire was started by machinery used by a company planting trees. Down the road, we find Anna trying to salvage her orchard. She had refused to leave.
We have our trees, our land, our house. So after we evacuated the elderly from the village, we decided to stay.
Jose Felix rallied his friends to try to stop the fire and save their homes.
You know this land and climate so well. How much hotter and drier is it now compared with 20, 25 years ago?
It's hotter and it rains less. It rains when it shouldn't rain and it's cold when it shouldn't be cold. Climate change is a reality.
The Spanish are experiencing their worst fires in 15 years. This, the island of Tenerife today. So across the country, including in Ateca, there's no let-up, although they hope they've won this battle for now. But everywhere you look, there are vivid reminders of just how quickly things can change. Nick Beak, BBC News, in northeast Spain.
In Myanmar, 6 soldiers who recently defected have admitted to carrying out human rights abuses on the orders of the military. They've given rare in-depth interviews to the BBC in which they describe the killing and raping of civilians and the burning of villages. The military seized power from Myanmar's democratically elected government led by Aung San Suu Kyi in a coup last year, and it's now trying to crush the armed civilian uprising against them. A warning, Rebecca Henschke's report from Myanmar does include some distressing images and details.
Myanmar is burning. Soldiers are being ordered to carry out abuses as the military fights against the civilian militias who are trying to restore democracy. This, the aftermath of a military raid on Yemet village on the 20th of December last year. A corporal we're calling Ang was in charge of one of the units.
The order was to open fire as we entered. We also had an order to shoot any man we saw and to set fire to every large and decent house in the village.
Corporal Ang says his unit killed 5 people that day. The soldiers burnt at least 60 houses. This one wasn't empty. There was a girl inside. Newly recruited soldier Thahar set fire to it.
As we reached the center of the village, I heard the voice of a girl who was trapped in the house. She was shouting, "Open it for me, open it for me." I told the captain, "I saw a girl. She's trapped in the room." He said, "I told you to kill everyone." He asked us to launch flares, so we did.
The village school wasn't burnt. Instead, young women were taken there. We spoke to 2 of them. They say the soldiers abused them in this room for 3 days.
They were looking at pornography on their phones and talked about what they saw. They were drinking and laughing in front of us. Then they came to us and blindfolded us with sarongs and pushed us down and took off our clothes and raped us.
I didn't want to live after that. I thought of committing suicide. I wanted to die.
All across the region, similar scenes. In the last 10 months, there have been more than 200 verified incidents of burning in villages, according to Myanmar Witness, a group that's tracking human rights abuses. In a statement, the military says the raids were to destroy the armed civilian uprising and describes those who were killed as terrorists. They deny burning villages. At least 3,000 soldiers have now defected. Many are ashamed of what they have done, and some are prepared to fight to restore democracy and stop the military forces they were once part of. Rebecca Hinchke, BBC News.
Now, scientists have developed a new telescope to detect the smashing together of dead suns known as neutron stars. Up until now, something that ordinary telescopes were unable to do. It gives astronomers the opportunity to study these objects for the first time. Our science correspondent Palab Ghosh has had exclusive access to the new telescope, and he sends us this report from La Palma in the Canary Islands.
Opening to the heavens, high above the clouds. A new telescope scans the skies for one of the most enigmatic objects in the universe, a neutron star. They're the smallest and densest bodies in the cosmos, so heavy that a sugar cube of it would weigh about the same as 8 billion people. Scientists have now found a way to detect them. Neutron stars have such powerful gravity that they're drawn together until they eventually merge. When that happens, there's a flash of light and a powerful shock wave ripples across the universe. When that shock wave is detected on Earth, the new telescope scrambles into action to find the exact location of the flash. The astronomers have to work fast. The flash of light lasts only a couple of days. Computer software is key in this impossibly difficult hunt. Researchers compare pictures of the same bit of sky night by night, and any speck of light that wasn't there before may be the momentary colliding neutron stars.
You would think that these explosions are very energetic, very luminous, it should be easy, but we're having to search through 100 million stars for the one object that we're interested in. And we need to do this very rapidly because the object will disappear on a timescale of a few days. So really this needle in a haystack challenge almost doesn't cut it, it's a huge challenge.
These quick collisions create conditions that take us to the very edge of the laws of physics. It could help to answer the mystery of how some of the heavier elements, such as gold and platinum, are created in the universe. The British-built telescope, called GO2, is nimble and can rapidly scan every bit of the sky above it.
When a real good event comes along, it's all hands on deck to make the most of it. And that, yeah, it's a nice sort of feeling to sort of spring into action.
With these instruments, researchers are learning about the cosmos faster than ever before and are on the precipice of a new age of astronomy.
So now we have almost a new way of looking at the universe. We're not hoping for new discoveries, we're being told where to find them, and we're getting to uncover piece by piece what lays out there in the universe.
40.
So far, just one neutron star collision has been detected. Now, this new telescope can pinpoint them routinely, revealing a new view of the universe that has so far been hidden. Palab Ghosh, BBC News, La Palma.
Time for a look at the weather now. Here's Sarah Keith-Lucas. Sarah.
Well, Rita, much of July so far has not only been very warm, it's also been very, very dry across many areas as well. Some of us have seen a little bit of patchy light rain out there today, but not everywhere. This was the picture as we ended the day a little earlier on in Leicestershire. So through the next 24 hours or so, then we are expecting a little bit more in the way of wet weather around, but it's going to be thundery showers on Friday, and they will be hit and miss. So not everywhere is going to catch some of that useful rainfall that we really do need, particularly down towards the southeast where it's been exceptionally dry. Quite a lot of cloud through the rest of tonight, and we've got one or two showers just pushing their way northwards through central parts of the UK. Still quite warm and muggy in the south, 17 degrees or so, whereas further north we're looking at highs around about lows, around about 11 or 12 degrees. Now through the day tomorrow, then a cloudy start, showery rain initially for central and southern England, pushing across Wales, northern England, perhaps southern Scotland as well. So there could be the odd rumble of thunder mixed in with some of those showers, particularly for South Wales and southwest England. Temperatures in the warmest spots 22 or 23 degrees, but a little bit cooler for the likes of Aberdeen and Newcastle with an onshore breeze. So then as we head through towards the weekend, we'll have this area of low pressure driving its way in from the Atlantic. Now, before it gets there, it's pushing in these southerly winds, so drawing in more of that warm air from the near continent. That means things will be warming up again through the weekend. For Saturday, initially some rain for Northern Ireland and some of that spreading into western parts of England and Scotland as well. The breeze picking up, but the southeast once again stays dry with temperatures here generally in the mid-20s during the day on Saturday. Second half of the weekend, low pressure moves right across the UK, so more of us seeing some showery rain. Quite a breezy spell of weather on Sunday, but it will be warm once again. We could see temperatures around 30 degrees in the southeast. That is still, though, 10 degrees cooler than it was just a few days ago. Rita.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And that's it. You can keep up with all the latest developments on the BBC website. Now it's time to join our colleagues across the nations and regions for the news wherever you are. But from us, it's good night.